What's up, everybody? This is Charlie Potter, senior team writer with BamaOnLine. That's Jimmy Stein, and we're here to talk some more football because Jimmy, man, it's here. I know we still got about 3 weeks until Alabama kicks off, but last night we had some NFL preseason on the TV. That's always great to see. I know we had the Hall of Fame game a week ago, but no offense to those guys, it feels like it's really here with a full slate of NFL games. Were you able to tune in last night at all?
I did. I got to see the entirety of the game actually, and Bryce didn't play, which is a little disappointing because that's why Alabama fan would tune in to the Panthers. So no Bryce, but it was football. There was a couple Alabama guys out there occasionally, but I'm excited about the fact that tonight there's more games tonight. There's games all day Saturday, a couple games Sunday. So this is a full weekend. And think about this, Charlie. We won't have a Thursday without football again until 2025.
It's a beautiful sound. It honestly is. And tonight, I mean, like you said, it's first week of the preseason, so there's a lot of guys that don't play. Looking at that list of inactives for the Panthers, it was long. None of those Alabama guys played, but tonight you got Falcons, Dolphins, Texans, Steelers, and then Eagles, Ravens. Now I don't know if we'll see Tua or Jalen. I highly doubt it. But it's always fun to see. And you're right. I mean, last night, that game on NFL Network with the Panthers and the Patriots, got to see Anthony Jennings make the start. He made a couple big plays. He's still, holding serve, really playing well in New England. But, yeah, it's fun to see. And you're right, man. It just feels like – because this has been a crazy offseason. I think we all share that collective thought, but it's here and it's great. It's a little cooler in Tuscaloosa today. It just feels like football. It's a great feeling. And with that, we're here today to kind of recap the first week of Alabama's fall camp. We're also going to preview the scrimmage a little bit later in the show because that's coming up tomorrow morning at Bryant-Denny. But we've now had a full week of preseason practice. We've had 6 media viewing periods, and just want to kind of go back and forth a little bit on our takeaways. So we were out there most recently on Wednesday, and that to me was the best day because we got a different vantage point. I don't want to say it was starting to get a little stale, but we were doing the same thing the first 5 days. But first day in pads, they were able to go in the indoor facility, and you get a completely different vantage point. We got a good look at the offense, of different drills, and we wanted to start off by just getting your thoughts on that day and kind of just overall what you've seen those first 6 days.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that Wednesday was the best day of all the viewing. And it's just simple logistics when the entirety of the team is working on one 100-yard field. We can see so much more because it's on top of us. You can see multiple groups and not just sort of what's right in front of you. You don't have to walk a half a mile to see something else. It is just a lot more convenient because it was just right on top of us. So I felt I got more out of watching practice Wednesday than all the other days, maybe even combined. Plus, they did some interesting things that we hadn't seen. A couple of drills with the backs that we hadn't seen in terms of, some of you guys have probably watched the video, of them using the big blue plastic balls and all sorts of ball security gimmicks that they have for the backs. I saw quite a bit. Saw a lot of the receiver group. I like watching the quarterback group throw to the wide receiver group up close. Got a real good look at Ryan Williams and some of the younger receivers. I even pointed out in my practice report that I was impressed with Rico Scott. He was with the lower end group of the receivers, but they're all involved in the drills, and he didn't do anything spectacular. He didn't do anything that made me think, oh, he's going to play. We're going to see him against Western Kentucky. I'm going to say, and he looks really impressive, gets out of his stance well. He's got a lot of burst, and he effortlessly caught 2 balls down the field that showed his hands. And it's just the first time I've noticed Rico Scott's like, hey, maybe this guy will pan out down the road. But Ryan Williams, impressive as always. All of the quarterbacks were very accurate delivering the ball. Jalen Milroe clearly the 1 quarterback, Kyle Simpson 2. Looks like to me like Austin Mack and Dylan Lonergan sort of switch out as to who's 3 and who's 4. We've seen mostly Austin Mack, I think, 3rd in that line. Most of the week we're at practice, but Lonergan looked like kind of he was getting a chance as being the 3rd quarterback at times. I'm sure in the scrimmage on Saturday, any attendees will get a better look at that. than we do in the position drills. But got a lot out of Wednesday, and we posted a lot of it on the board.
Yeah, it's for people that don't know, like when we're out there on the Thomas Drew practice fields, you can get kind of close to the defensive linemen, some edge rushers, maybe those inside backers. But like when you're in the indoor, you're basically on the sideline and you have to be told to get out of the way a lot of the time. And so it is, it kind of felt like that first day a little bit overwhelming because you're taking in so much in a short period of time. I know we're out there for 4 periods, I think. But yeah, it's to get an up close look at the running backs, the offensive linemen, the receivers. It was nice. And, to go back to your point of what they were kind of doing to begin drills, I know a lot of people tweeted out those videos because it's a drill just we don't get a look at a lot is they were catching balls in traffic and then trying to avoid a lot of obstacles because they had those swatting arms, they had those exercise balls. It's funny to hear Coach Jamarcus Shepard chiding those guys that stepped out of bounds and maybe got hit with a ball. But it kind of seemed like that practice was very focused on the screen game. And I think that's interesting because that drill in specific, you're catching the football in traffic. You basically have 4 or 5 of those big blocking dummies in your way. And then that translated to what we saw a little bit later with the backs working with really, it was the whole offense, but the backs working on swing passes out of the backfield. We saw one of those receiver lines kind of work on some tunnel screens. I think that to Kendrick Law could make people a lot of money this fall. It could be a very dynamic play. And I thought it was interesting because, that line of receivers includes Caleb Odom. To have that 6'5", big body run a tunnel screen is something you don't see every day. And then, of course, you have Ryan Williams doing it too. That's always going to get some attention. I'm guilty of sharing that on social media and putting it on the board as well. But I thought that was interesting. And, again, like you said, though, getting a look at the wide receivers, that's always nice to get it a little closer. I thought what we saw from the tight ends was nice. Some guys made some nice plays, and I thought it was interesting, too. We got kind of a look at a 3 tight end look near the goal line where they were all running different routes and catching the ball from different quarterbacks. And as expected, that's guys like C.J. Dupree, Robbie Utes, and Josh Cuevas up first. But no, that indoor practice, man, it was a lot of fun, and I thought the interviews afterwards were pretty good too. We had a little bit of a distraction because we heard some music from an ice cream truck. That's been well documented now. An ice cream truck basically pulled onto the practice field after Wednesday's practice, and Kalen DeBoer had ice cream for the guys. I think they were really excited about that. But just whenever we were around Nick Sheridan, the offensive coaches, and some of those offensive players, did you have a takeaway or anything from those interview moments?
I sure did. I did pretty much the entirety of the CJ Dupree's availability. We hadn't, the media, I say we, the media, hadn't had a lot of opportunity with CJ. Yeah. Really hadn't been here that long and hasn't been one of the available guys frequently, but he was good. He certainly gave long, thoughtful answers to questions and was honest, even about staying at Alabama. I thought was a good question and a good answer about his. Gave a lot of thought to turning pro, not actually getting in the portal, but maybe going to the NFL. But when he heard of Kalen DeBoer was going to be the hire, he knew of the offense enough to be really interested. Like, hey, this is an offense. They're going to throw me the ball, maybe. And we've seen that in our practice periods, as Charlie was talking to earlier. Look, I think one of the litmus tests for is this team going to throw it a lot is when they get the running backs and the tight ends really involved in the pass game. It's not just the high payoff throws of quarterbacks to wide receivers down the field. It's a lot of throws, a volume of throws to running backs and tight ends. They seem to work on that quite a bit, or certainly in the practice periods we see. As Charlie pointed out, we get to see 4 periods, and there's typically over 25 to show how long they practice and what little we see. We see 4 periods out of 25 to 30 even practice periods, in a single practice. But we have seen them throw quite a bit to the backs and to the tight ends. And I think that's going to be something that we see in the fall because Alabama's got the personnel to do that. I think Justice and Jam both are good receivers. Justice might even be better than good as a receiver. And in the tight end group, I think C.J. Dupree can catch it. Just talking about him. C.J. can catch it. He can make a play there. Robbie Ouse can catch it and make a play there. But my guess is after watching him up close, if there's a tight end that's going to really ding defenses, it's Josh Cuevas. He's built a little differently than the other guys, a little more narrow frame, kind of looks like a receiver. I think we'll see Josh Cuevas in last year's Amari Niblack role as basically a matchup that they want to exploit at the tight end spot.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you look at, and I know it's not the gospel, but Alabama updated its roster with some new weights for the guys, and all those returning tight ends bulked up. They got my guy Robbie Youths listed at 270 pounds. That's a big tight end, but he's also a battering ram for Alabama from a blocking standpoint. Play some fullback, so I like what I've seen from Josh Cuevas. Maybe we'll get to hear from him later this preseason. We've got other interviews coming up over the next couple of weeks, but I think on that same day. An interesting takeaway for me is just the running back talk. I think it's been obvious from everybody from those first 6 viewing periods that Justice Haynes and Jam Miller are at the front of that line. But it's been basically the time that you look over there, it could be a different running back at the front of that group. And I think they have a true 1A, 1B situation in the backfield. And the good thing, whether it was from Nick Sheridan, the offensive coordinator, Robert Gillespie, the running backs coach, or even Jam Miller himself, he came up. The relationship that those two have, it's an unselfish one and it's a supportive one. But they're also competing each and every day. I think that's good for both of them. I think that's a healthy dynamic to have at the top of your position group. And Robert Gillespie talked about playing the hot hand. They're going to continue to do that. But these guys have waited their turn and they're hungry. And I think Alabama, from a running back standpoint, despite losing its top 2 rushers from last season's team, might be in a better situation because of what they have at the top of that pecking order. We've heard some good things about Richard Young from Kalen DeBoer over the course of the preseason. And I think those young guys, have been impressive too. But I also think not just that day, Wednesday, after that indoor practice viewing, we also heard from some defensive guys the day before, and I know we kind of split up, and we had some new guys come up, Keon Sabb and Damani Jackson, and I thought both of those guys were good. They were to the point, but I thought Keon was a little more revealing, but Damani had the money quote. You were over there for that, how the aid doesn't change. So to hear from both of those guys was good. Just for me, being in front of Keon and getting to ask him some stuff. He's a guy that obviously was impacted by the changes at Michigan, and that impacted his decision, and then his familiarity with some people in Alabama's program, and having played them in the Rose Bowl also impacted that decision. He said that Alabama was the toughest game that they played. He knows and has been around Courtney Morgan, who's now at Alabama, who was at Michigan before Washington, and then he's a guy that spent some time in IMG, and Alabama's got a couple of those guys on this roster with Tyler Booker and Jahad Campbell playing their high school ball there too. So I thought Keon was great. I listened back to your recording of Damani, but for you, did you have any takeaways from him, or maybe anything else from that day with the defensive guys?
Yeah, my big takeaway from Damani for sure was, and it was something that I guess if I'd sat down and thought through, should have thought on my own, but hearing Damani tell his story, it really hit home about how little football he's played. Mm-hmm. And that's stunning. But I went over it in a piece the other day, but Damani did start last year and played the whole season, and it wasn't always great. He frankly didn't play well all the time last season at USC, playing on a bad defense, and his PFF grades, if you want to take them very seriously, weren't great week to week. But the year before that, he had rarely played. He was a true freshman at USC, didn't get on the field a lot. That's understandable. The year before his senior year, he gets hurt in the first game, misses pretty much the entirety of his senior season. You're like, well, at least he played his junior year. No, that's the COVID year. Mm-hmm. In California, football was really restricted throughout the COVID season. So Damani, who's this big 5-star prospect and has every conceivable tool you need to be a great cornerback, he just hasn't played a lot of football in games. And it makes what happened to him last year at Southern Cal make all the sense in the world to me. I think that Damani is a guy that could be in store for a huge leap forward in his development now that he's going to be consistently playing in games week to week, now that he's a junior in college and an older kid. I just think we've barely begun to scratch the surface of what Damani Jackson can be as a football player.
No, I agree. And I think it was a good point by him. And, if you're him, you kind of got to do your due diligence too, and tell your story and where things stand. But it's interesting to hear from him about how when he was out at Mater Day, that a guy like Xavier Brown stepped in for him.
Took
And
a
I think
spot.
that's it's a crazy dynamic now with those two kind of being at the top of the pecking order at that cornerback position. I think Damani, I would be surprised if he's not starting game one. But Xavier, he's a guy that he's had a cast on his left hand. But he's been able to practice. That's just hard for a defensive back whenever you're jamming and doing things like that, to be able to be full go. But I think that cornerback position is interesting because you have Zabian, who's played a lot of reps with that first team when we've been out there. But we've also seen a guy like Jalen Mbakwe do that. And while Zabian's had a lot of praise from the coaching staff, whether it's Kalen DeBoer, Kane Womack, Mo Linguist, Jalen Mbakwe's name's come up a lot too. So I think for Saturday, we're kind of getting a little ahead of ourselves here. But I think that cornerback position is going to be fascinating to see play out. We'll save that for a little bit later. I think what I want to get to first before we fully move into scrimmage talk, I almost didn't bring this up because I think it's a little pointless, but I sent it to you, so I'm not going to have you prepare for something and not bring it up. But the coaches poll came out this week, and for the first time since 2009, Alabama is not among the top three. Saying that out loud is another one of those just absurd Nick Saban stats over the course of this past decade plus. But Alabama comes in at number 5. You have Georgia in first place with 46 first place votes. You have Ohio State second with 7 of those votes. Oregon's third. Texas is first, and then Alabama. That rounds out your top 5. Do you have any thoughts from that? Any impressions? I don't think it's that far fetched given the changes. You don't have the Nick Saban bump per se, but I wouldn't be surprised at the end of the year maybe they're a little higher. What about you?
Yeah, Alabama started exactly where I expected them to start based on viewing of preseason polls going back to January. I expected Alabama to be 5 behind those 4 teams. And again, that's not saying that's where I would put them or what I think is best. It doesn't really matter. But it's where I expected Alabama to be. And what the first thing that's interesting to me, Charlie, is where would Alabama have been had there not been a coaching change? What if Saban had returned and it had been business as usual? I think Alabama would have definitely been 4 and arguably 3rd. I don't think they would have been 1st or 2nd. I think Georgia and Ohio State just have the returning roster, and what they did in the transfer portal, particularly Ohio State, kind of cinched them as the top 2 in the preseason. And Alabama might have been 3rd ahead of Texas, maybe, had Saban returned. But what's interesting to me is, let's say that Alabama had been 3rd if Saban returned, is you lose the greatest coach of all time in the sport, and it only costs you 2 spots. I mean, that's what, like, wow, at worst, losing Saban dinged Alabama 2 spots in the poll. Now, once the games start being played, then you wad the paper up and throw it in the trash can, because then it's all determined on the field. And will Alabama be the 5th best team over the course of the regular season? We don't know. We're going to obviously talk about a lot what we think, but I do think it's fair. I think that's a fair guess. Maybe a little low, but a fair guess as to what to expect from Alabama over the course of the regular season. Let's remember, Nick Saban probably didn't play a schedule quite as tough as this schedule that Alabama's facing, basically playing 3 top 16 teams on the road.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said is a good point, because I think this team has the potential to be a top 5 team in the country this fall. Obviously, we're going to see how things play out in the field. That game against Georgia, week 5, is going to be huge. And then that stretch in late October to early November is going to be, I think, even more telling. But yeah, I think for this team, 5 does feel kind of right. It is a little bit of rat poison. I'm sure they'll use it as motivation. You got the AP poll coming out next Monday too. It's probably going to be pretty similar. I will say too, I don't put a lot of stock in a preseason coaches poll, because I do think there are some coaches out there that do this, but I also know there's a lot of SIDs that fill them out for them. So, until that first college football playoff top 25 comes out, I don't really pay too much attention to it. But I think it's like you said, it's a good litmus test. And it's fascinating, given all the changes, whether it's obviously Coach Saban leaving, all the defensive backs and some of the key players at other areas that left, you only get Nick 2 spots. I think that's also some respect for the job that Kalen DeBoer's done over the course of his career, not just at Washington. I mean, the guy has 12 losses all time. So I think for Alabama, if you were to go back on January 10th, maybe January 11th, maybe even January 12th when Kalen DeBoer was brought in, if you were to say this team, seeing what all left from the transfer portal, was a preseason top 5 team, I think people would have been not only pleasantly surprised, but maybe a little shocked. So yeah, that's where we sit right now. There's still a lot to happen, still a lot to go preseason wise. And that's where we're kind of changing our focus, because you got an important scrimmage coming up tomorrow. Alabama's going to go over to Bryant-Denny tomorrow morning. That's closed to reporters, so we won't be there, but we'll be at Kalen DeBoer's press conference afterwards. But I wanted to get your thoughts on this, Jimmy. Just the scrimmages are important. I think this first one's important. I think the next one's even more important. You start to really shift your focus on who you're going to be coaching up for the season. But this one, we've heard from Coach Chris Kapilovic, the offensive line coach, some others, just the importance of this one to kind of start. It's kind of a separation of sorts. So with these position battles that Alabama's had in preseason camp, there's competition everywhere, but some of those key ones, what's maybe the most interesting one for you going into this first scrimmage on Saturday?
Yeah, well, apart from the ones that we talk about all the time at right tackle and one of the cornerback spots, I think those are pretty obvious answers. We need to talk about that. But apart from that, I think the rotation at wide receiver is super interesting, because wide receiver is one of the positions where you're going to have starters. You're going to have guys that come out and they play the first snap of the first game, and that's your starting group. And I think from basic what we've seen at practice, to the surprise of no one, it will be a surprise if Jeremy Bernard, Kobe Prentice, and Kendrick Law kind of don't make up those first guys that come in. I think that's pretty obvious. But what about the next group, and how many receivers are going to make up the first team rotation? That is super interesting to me, because there's so many names in the mix. Emmanuel Henderson, Cole Adams, Caleb Odom, Ryan Williams, and a guy we hardly ever talk about, and we should talk about all the time, possibly Jaron Hamilton, who, again, we don't mention, and then we look up, and it looks like at practice he's seeing significant time with the first group, it seems, and at the head of a lot of these lines. But I think Jaron Hamilton is another guy that's in position to be a part of the first team rotation. Again, you might start 3 guys, but typically most teams play 6, 7. It's not crazy to even play 8. Alabama's numbers are so good at wide receiver, and there's so much talent, they might play 8 guys with the first group. But I'm really interested to see, okay, who are those first wide receivers they play after Prentice, Bernard, and Law, who you figure are the top 3.
No, I agree. Because I mean, you rattled off 5 other names. That's 8 guys easy, and that's not including a guy like Jalen Hell, who's on the sideline with an injury too. So it's a room that I think maybe had some concerns early on because of what you lost from a draft and a transfer portal standpoint. But I think the talent's there. You heard from Nick Sheridan, the strength of that room is speed. And that's clear with guys like Kendrick Law, Ryan Williams, I think others as well, Emmanuel Henderson. So, tomorrow is a day where those guys can really show out and start to kind of vie for spots in that pecking order. So, yeah, I like the wide receiver pick. We're going to talk offensive tackle and corner coming up, but more of the underrated ones. I think what happens at the Wolf spot is fascinating because, Q Robinson is a leader there. We've seen him coaching up those young guys at practice. He's been consistently at the front of the line, but he has some talented dudes behind him. Right behind him has been Keanu Coote, who's waited his turn as well. He's a talented player. I think he has a chance to be a breakout player for Alabama this fall. And then Quay Russaw, continue to hear really good things about Quay and the way he's progressed. I think if he really dials in and learns this defense, not saying he hasn't, but, overall from an offseason standpoint, if he knows this defense well, it's going to be hard to keep 4 off the field because he's a talented player. So can those guys kind of challenge Q at the top of that pecking order? And I'm fascinated to know how many of those guys actually get on the field, like in a 3rd and long situation when it's an obvious passing down. does Kane Womack send 2 Wolves on the field and maybe kick a bandit inside with 1 defensive tackle? That's a potential for a pass rushing situation because we know they're going to have 5 defensive backs on the field. You don't really want to take those inside backers off because they're talented. Could we see a couple edge rushers? Because if that's the case, then that opens up more opportunities for guys like Coot and Rousseau, and even maybe a Yanze Pierre, who's also progressed. So, it's a day like today, they're obviously not going to be hitting the quarterback. Jalen Milrow and those guys are going to be in black, no contact jerseys. But hearing just how they perform is going to be something I'm interested in. And that kind of leads into what we were talking about a minute ago, the ones at the top of the list from a position battle standpoint. How do those offensive tackles handle those guys on the edge? Because we've seen Caden Proctor now the last couple practices back at his old spot at left tackle. That didn't take very long. And we've consistently seen, at least when we're out there, and you made a good point where we're out there for 4 of maybe 28 periods. But it's been consistently Will Conformby at right tackle. We've seen now Elijah Pritchett move over and kind of work with that second unit. But it sounds like there's still a rotation there throughout practice. But that offensive tackle position, it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. If it is a situation where they rotate guys during the season, we've seen that before. But just from these practice viewings and maybe what you expect for tomorrow, just where do you stand on this offensive tackle competition?
Yeah, one thing that's really interesting, and maybe the reason that Formby appears to be maybe slightly ahead of Pritchett, although they both could play, is emphasis. Last year, the offensive line gained a lot of weight. There was a lot of run the ball mentality all spring and summer. Then you get in the games, and Alabama did run the ball a lot. As a matter of fact, the quarterback only threw it 23 times a game. That's not a lot in 2023 football for the quarterback to only throw it 23 times a weekend. So they did run the ball a lot. Well, this year, they're obviously going to throw it more. So you wonder if it comes down to a competition for one spot on the offensive line. What might separate the two is who's the better pass protector, because you're going to be throwing the ball more often than you did before. Pass protection becomes critical. You wonder if maybe had they kept the same offense and the same mentality and Saban had stayed and it had been just another year of the same offense, they would have gone maybe with a run blocker there. But I think Will Conformby is just a very natural pass protector due to his incredible length. He can play the right side. He could probably play the left side pretty well himself with those long arms and long legs and good feet that he's got. He's just has every look of an NFL type pass protector at tackle. And I wonder if maybe that's why he might be a little ahead of Pritchett, who might be a little more powerful, who might be a little more athletic, a guy you can pull and get out in front of the run game. I think that's where Pritchett would really shine. But again, Alabama's going to throw the ball quite a bit. I think Formby being ahead in that battle might give us some clue as to what direction the offense is headed.
Yeah, I think the scrimmage is going to be really telling just in terms of what happens with the offensive line moving forward. Coach Cap talked about that when he came up last week now. But yeah, I think Elijah Pritchett's someone to hear from him and some others has made a lot of strides. I think that's positive to hear. I think Alabama's actually in a pretty good situation when it comes to those tackles, because you thought, 6 months ago that you were going to have 2 green tackles really to deal with. And now with Caden Proctor coming back, you have 2 guys that have made a lot of progress over the course of the summer, gained a lot of confidence, that are, battling for that other spot. I think that's really interesting. And that word strides, it came up a lot with a lot of these young defensive backs. I think they're kind of rising up. And I think when you look at that cornerback position, with Zabian Brown, with Jalen Mbakwe, maybe even Zay Mincy, a guy like Deshaun Jones coming over, just kind of how they play out tomorrow's scrimmage is going to be fascinating to see, because I think it's wide open. I think that Zabian Brown might have the upper hand, but for lack of a better word, he has a bum hand at the moment. And does that limit him at all in the scrimmage? And if it does that open the door for a guy like Jalen Mbakwe to get a lot of play with the ones and to stand out? Because we've seen preseason injuries kind of limit a guy, and it doesn't sound like what's happening with Zabian is significant or severe or will keep him out long. He's even been out there working on things, but if you're in a heated position battle, any time off the field is not good for you. So I think that for me, Zabian's a guy to watch, but that whole position group and how it plays out is going to be really, really interesting to see come tomorrow.
Yeah, one thing I was a little wrong about in terms of summer projections us making through May, June, and July. I'd sort of guessed in terms of who would win that corner spot opposite Damani Jackson. I'd sort of guessed it would be Deshaun Jones, the transfer from Wake Forest, because of his experience, not because I felt like he was a more talented kid, but he just an experience and age. This is a redshirt junior who's been a starting player in the ACC for 2 years. Actually led Wake Forest in interceptions a year ago. I thought his veteran stature, his playing experience, he would walk in and sort of, okay, well, Deshaun will hold down the fort until these younger guys are ready. But who would have guessed or known that Zabian Brown and Jalen Mbakwe and maybe even others, they're ready or close enough to ready to where Deshaun Jones may not be the starting corner opposite Damani. It might be one of these freshmen, whether it's Zabian or whether it's Jalen Mbakwe. There just certainly seems to be a lot of buzz about Zabian and Bach. Zabian ended the spring as a starting corner, was a starting corner on A-Day, now fighting through that little minor injury he's got. But yeah, that corner spot is interesting. What you hope for if you're Alabama, Charlie, is sure someone will emerge and be the starting corner opposite Damani. But now you've got some depth there because now you got other guys you can try. If it's Zabian and he has some freshman moments, maybe you can stick the redshirt junior out there to settle the storm a little bit. Alabama just has better depth at corner, I think, than they were worried about maybe this spring and summer.
No, I agree. I think depth is. I think a lot of positions have a lot better depth, and that perfectly leads us into the last thing we want to talk about. It's just a player to watch in this scrimmage, and we'll do one each on each side of the ball. And when we talk about depth, I think it's very important at the inside linebacker position. And hearing from Kane Womack, we've talked about it before on the show. Justin Jefferson has been a guy that he views as a third starter type, and to have that with the guys that have had a little bit of injury history ahead of him, but are stellar players, I think is critical. And I think just if he can continue to impress and improve the way he has over the course of the spring and summer, it'll be fascinating to see if maybe they start to look at ways to get Justin Jefferson on the field. Maybe I don't know if they have 3 inside backers on the field at once, but maybe he's a sub package guy. We've seen them kind of rotate players in the past of that position. And if Justin Jefferson continues to make the steps that he has, then maybe he's a guy that does that. And I think today, or I keep thinking today's a scrimmage, tomorrow and next week, if he continues to make those steps, then maybe that's what happens. So I think for me, defensively, you could go with a ton of guys, but I'm really interested in Justin Jefferson. What about you on that side of the ball?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat a little bit and talk about one position, but 2 players, and that's Q-Rob and Keanu Coot at the Wolf. So the Wolf spot and those 2 in particular who are at the head of the line and almost maybe a 1A and 1B situation like you have at running back. I think we'll see both of them a lot, even though you're talking about one position. But look, Alabama lost Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell off of last year's team. It was a different scheme where there was 2 outside linebackers on the field a lot. That won't necessarily be the case in this scheme, but you're losing so much pass rush ability in Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell. I think Alabama's best hope to continue to be a good pass rush team is those Wolves, Q Robinson and Keanu Coot. They've got to be able to consistently apply pressure to the quarterback when they're in there. And these are guys that have a world of potential, but we haven't really seen it in the games yet. So we need to see that early. And for Alabama to be as good as they need to be on defense, those 2 guys have to be good players.
I know they do. And I think I included Quay Russaw in my 6 players to watch, but those guys in front of him, it's at that position in particular throughout Nick Saban's tenure, those guys had to wait their turn. Those guys have waited their turn, and now they have a prime opportunity in front of them. So I think it's going to be tough for them to relinquish it. I just think it's going to be interesting to see how they utilize those guys within this defense and how that might be a little different. But switching gears to the offense, you could go a bunch of different directions here. I think both of those offensive tackles not named Caden Proctor are kind of on the clock for Saturday. But for me, it's got to be Ryan Williams. This is the first scrimmage. How can you not pick the 5-star plus recruit? He hasn't been on campus long, but he had rave reviews in the summer for those summer-led or the player-led practices, and for him to get an opportunity to cut loose on Bryant Denny. We saw what he did the last time he was on that field for the state championship game against Jalen Mbakwe and Clay Chalkville. If he has a big day, first of all, people are going to know about it. It's people aren't going to be quiet about it, but it's going to go a long way in kind of deciding that rotation that you mentioned, because I think he's going to play this fall. It's a matter of when, not if. And then, if he has a big scrimmage or two before the season starts, it might be earlier than we expected. So I'm just interested to see what happens with Ryan Williams, going against, older teammates in this first kind of live action practice, and see if he can step up to the challenge and what he can do.
I love that answer. All eyes on him. There's some jackhammering going on in my condominium building, and even that's not as loud as the buzz around Ryan Williams throughout the summer and fall camp. And you can bet the few eyes that are allowed in the stadium Saturday to watch the scrimmage, they will all be on number 2 in white, because Ryan's sort of the show, right? But my answer is going to bore some people, but it's Jalen Milroe. We know what he is. We know what he's capable of. We kind of know him as a player really well. But this will be, he's running the Kalen DeBoer offense now. It's completely different. And to me, it's this big, Charlie. To me, it's like last year, I got the sense that Nick Saban and Tommy Rees did what they could to take a lot off of Jalen. What can we do to take this off of Milroe? Because it's a lot for a guy who hasn't played much at his age. It's a lot for him to carry. What can we do to make this simple? What can we do to not put the weight of the world on Jalen Milroe? Fast forward 1 year, now Kalen DeBoer comes in. He's inheriting an experienced guy who came in 6th in the Heisman voting last year. It's now going to be put on Milroe. Now it is on Milroe. The coach isn't going to have any hesitation, nor is Nick Sheridan, to put it on Milroe. Hey, we need you to carry us a little bit here, and we're going to throw it a lot. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Jalen Milroe looks like as an experienced player who's now carrying the offense instead of sort of being protected or hidden by it. And I think it could be spectacular at times. I'm expecting some big numbers from him at times. The question will be, can he do it consistently week to week? But that's what I'm looking forward to hearing about the most, is Jalen's day running this offense.
No doubt. Yeah. And I think for Jalen in these scrimmages, they're not going to be the full playbook. That won't be out there like till the end of the season. But yeah, it's a little different than the spring, because you're getting ready for a game 1. And I think that they're looking to see what he can do. He's talked about this playbook and how he's talked about it with the coaches and what he likes, what he doesn't like. So they're catering it around Jalen. And it sounds like he's done really well in preseason camp. Kalen DeBoer raved over him last Sunday. And so I think if he can carry that over, I think there's going to be a lot of people. Well, I say a lot of people. There's not going to be a lot of people watching the scrimmage, but the people that do are going to come away impressed if he can continue to make those strides. And, afterwards, it would be interesting to see what Kalen DeBoer says about him and the other guys. I know I'll be there to cover that. We'll have full live coverage of the scrimmage and everything like that. And just to kind of give you guys an idea, after the scrimmage, there's fan day on Sunday. So if you haven't already made plans, practice is going to be open for fans to watch. I think if you're a Yay Alabama subscriber, you can go down on the field and get autographs as well. I don't think you'll be running, but power walking, that's an Olympic sport. So get ready, get stretched out. So that's what's to come. We're going to have wall-to-wall coverage of that. Jimmy and I have been tackling this, and I think tackling it well, good form through the first week. We've got some exciting things to come next week. I think people want to tune in for that, just in terms of announcements. But no, man, it's been a lot of fun the first week. We still got a few more to go. And if you guys haven't, make sure you like and subscribe to the YouTube page. Give it a thumbs up. That really helps. turn on those notifications so you get an update whenever a new video is out. I know Tim and Joseph and Andrew have done one this week, and those will continue. And we'll have even more football to talk about, Jimmy.
Looking forward to it. Big time. It's going to be a big week, and we'll actually be out of practice at least once this upcoming week.
Yeah, we get a little bit dialed back. One viewing period next week and the week after. It's going to be a little different. Might start having withdrawals, but it's been fun to be out there with you, man. Been fun to catch up on these, and we'll get you guys on the next show. And thanks for subscribing to BOL, everybody.